Oh, I love coming in with my microphone muted. Oh, seeing that thing about the Mafia popping up, that just makes me think about it, and I was kind of asked to see if I could do a fairy Godfather story. And, well, it's not Friday, so it's not really fairy tale night, but as tomorrow's stream might be delayed if not postponed because of doing stuff in another person's stream, because we're going to be visiting For the Wastes. For monster dating, I might do a narration real quick. If no one minds. Because honestly, I thought it was a funny story, so I'm going to switch over here and turn off rivals real quick. Let you see the fireplace. And I'm going to tell you a tale that I thought was, pretty funny when I was writing it. But anyway, this I just put as Not Sleeping Beauty. Okay, you mooks, gather around, and I'm gonna tell you a tale, alright? Way back when, think about the time that the new deli opened up a few blocks away. You know the place. Patty's Hyman, right? Anyway. Well, there was this new family in town, see? They wasn't too up on the local customs, which is a bit of a problem. You see, the don of this gang was about to be a papa, and his wife was all up in arms about making a good first impression. So, being the busy man he was, he let her make all the arrangements, ordering food, getting the hall, inviting the guests, the works. Problem was, there weren't enough supply going around, and she had to make some cuts to the guest list, if you know what I mean. See, the thing is, some cuts just ain't to be made. And when you're trying to get in good with the local bosses, you gotta respect all of them. You can't go picking and choosing, Now see, there's this one boss over on the other side of the tracks. Not a bad guy if you's on his good side, but he got a bad rep. And is notorious for being pretty busy, so the Donna had it in her little head, it best not to disturb the man. Feeling he might not even show, chose to be the one to cut. Yeah, that's when the shit hit the fan, because he got wind of the party, and he was a bit miffed to be cut out of the deal. So here's what went down, see? 12 little pissa bosses was invited. Old boss 13 weren't none too happy. Yeah, the 12 yutzes gave their gifts, you know the deal. Beauty, talent, guaranteed big knockers when she grew into them. Yeah, the head of the biz and bod for sin. All of after she gets to her Dolce Massimo. When she's all legal and whatnot, if you catch my drift. Anyways, the 11 of the boys got the job done when in burst the old badass himself. He clearly ain't looking happy about being on the invite list. The Donna, being the mouthy broad she is, goes on about figuring he was too busy and thought he was a big deal going down or not wanting to interrupt. Which was all fine and good, but seeing as the boss knew about her putting in the orders, one of which being one of his gigs, he knew all the deets. You thinking you guys can pull the wool over on me? only sending out the invites and leaving mine out. Your orders went through my establishment. Did you think I wouldn't find out about this? Sorry, Don Folletti. We didn't have enough space to order places for all of you. And we were rushed to the hospital before we were getting ready. My wife was already having a child. Gio della figa! The table all sounded aghast. Pardon my manners. I get a bit upset at people who don't show the proper respect. Now I see there's 12 places, so there's that empty spot on the end of the table that could have been for me. Now, give me a plate and this all gets cleared up. Sorry, we don't have 13 plates. What do you mean you ain't got 13 plates? You know what? For dishonoring me on this day of your daughter's christening, I'm gonna put a curse on her and use whole family. How about that? No, please, it was an oversight. It will never happen again. We will name our next child after you. A son. No matter. The dark-suited fairy strolled over towards a cradle where the baby girl had been receiving her blessings and gifts. So here's the deal. You got a nice little girl here. It'd be a shame if she were to, say, prick a finger on a spinning wheel sometimes before her dia smoke. She's gonna take a long nap with the fishes, capiche? He leaned down and kissed the baby's forehead. Too bad. She could have been a good looker. He looked back at the Don and Donna, tipped his hat, then vanished into a burst of acrid black smoke. The Donna fell into her husband's arms, crying and sobbing, until a little bookish man peeked back out from the empty spot on the table. Pardon me, is the boss gone? Thank goodness. Now, I'm not nearly as powerful as Folletti, but I might be able to cook the books a little on his curse. Do what you can, please, I beg of you. Well, if you honor me a favor to a place to hide out, I can take the girl away where she won't need a wheel. Just keep us in the green and I'll keep her safe. I'll see if I can loosen the hex a bit too. Maybe, make it so it's not a dirt nap. I mean, I don't think I can cancel it out all the way. Just rig it a bit in our favor. Please, please, do what you can for our daughter Alba. I'll do my best for her. Well, you kids know what happened then. The little bookie took the kid and headed off on the coast away from the city and all the business. Let me tell you, when it came down to fishing, this girl was a hell of a tosser, singing to the waves and getting as many as she could haul. I mean, not that it's a dame's work to be doing that kind of labor, but the bookish little fella was too busy trying to keep things under control. Well, a nice pretty girl like that, looking the way she did, is gonna get a lot of looks. There's this scruffy kid from the docks that came around and helped her haul in a few times. Nice kid. I didn't think he was all that great looking, but she seemed to think so. Anyways, this kid was actually the son of one of the bosses down by the pier, so he knew his way around a fish net, if you know what I mean. Kid never let on who his old man was, 'cause he didn't want to scare Alba off or nothing. Kid was head over heels for her, though, so one day he defies his old man and asks her to hook up. She was tits over tea kettle about it, running home to tell old Bookie. Bookie wasn't having none of it. Listen here, little girl, Alba, you're already promised. It's been that way since you were born, and there's no how you can marry this scruffy hooker. Alba, of course, was all tears and torn up over it, but she respected Papa Bookie more than anything, and went out to tell the kid about it, except when she got there, where there was to meet up, he never showed. She went weeping home to old Bookie, who was busy packing up the joint. Well, Alba, I'm sorry for not telling you the truth all these years, but your father is a Don back in the city, and your marriage was arranged when you were a baby to help out the city and all her people. I was asked to keep you out of harm's way all this time, but it's time for you to go back to your familia. I'll do what I must for the familia, said the good girl Alba. So they get back into town and settle back at her family's home. They were all glad to see her and welcomed her with open arms. Even her little brother, who she never met, Foley, who was a right rascal. Yeah, he was named after Don Fay Filoti, but Filoti hadn't forgiven the Don and Donna for the insult. But anyway, it was about a week out from her. Despite warnings, Alba was wandering the neighborhood on her own, free as a lark, when she thought she spied the hooker boy over by one of the markets. Well, things ain't easy walking around the market, and running through it ain't the brightest of ideas either, especially when you don't know the area. Albert ends up turning down a back alley and crashes into a stall selling spinners. Well, bada bing, bada boom. She gets a jab from a spinner and she's out like a light. So, fortunately for her and us, because she was looking like a Sally stick pin on a bender and up for, whatever you want. Old Bookie found her before any of the lechers could and brought her home to her papa. Oi, her papa and mama were knocked for a loop. The Don nearly choked the living shit out of old Bookie for failing to keep his little girl safe. That's when it hit old Bookie like a shot. I did a fix. The Don didn't want to hear him, but his old lady did and begged him to stop choking him. What kind of fix did you find? Old Bookie tried to straighten himself up a bit. See, there's this thing called a true love's kiss. It'll break any curse, I swear. The Don stared daggers. Then why didn't she wake when I kissed her? I love my daughter with all I am. Boss, it ain't that kind of kiss she needs. I mean the kind you give your wife. The Donna blushes brightly. Then old Bookie shakes his head. No, not that kind of kiss. He wipes his brow a bit with his handkerchief. Like someone she's in love with and loves her back. That kind of kiss. From the back of the room, you can hear a kid's voice calling out, "We're boned." Yeah, Foley heard the whole thing. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. He might have been reacting to see old Don Fay Filoti coming down the way and a few of his men from the dock. Now, some of you kids might be seeing where this is going. Shut up and don't ruin it for those who don't. Filoti and his men burst into Don's little family establishment and looked around. Well, boys, this is it. This is a new place, seeing as there ain't going to be around to run it. Well, yeah, he just walks forward and leans to kiss the Donna's hand. My sincerest apologies for what's gone down, but business is business, you see. What do you want, Don Filoti? Asked the Don. Why, I came here to see certain curses and wishes fulfilled, and that's what a fairy godfather is meant to do, he smiled broadly. What do you mean, asked the Donna. Well, I figured since the little Bookie cooked my curse, I would grant another godchild's wish. He grins again, then glances at Foley. Donna rushes over to her son and kneels looking at him and shaking him roughly. What did you wish? What did you wish? Mama, I wish that if Alba fell for her curse, I'd never have to hear my family cry about it. Young Foley answered softly. Wish granted. Don Filoti snapped his fingers, and all the familia fell silent, then tumbled to the floor asleep. Foley crying softly as he watches, then falls asleep himself. Come on, boys, let's peruse the new dates. Old Bookie, who had made himself scarce, kept watching the Don and his men rummage the restaurant for what they felt like keeping. But he noticed one of the men hanging back a bit and wandering more to the living area. The young man, now out of view from the rest of the mob, furrows his brow, seeing the young Alba laying on the table in the dining room, as if for a wake. Sobbing, he leans over and caresses her cheek. Alba, if I only knew that this was what you were meant for. Old Bookie appeared quick next to him. Your hooker. That's what she liked calling me. I'm Philippe, Foyetti's son. He looked at Bookie. I guess I was late for the wedding. Not at all. He looks him over. Look, kid, if you want to save her, you're going to have to kiss her. Philippe raises an eyebrow, then shrugs and leans down, only to find Bookie's hand covering her over her lips. Not out of wedlock, you mook. Then he gives a sharp backhand to the degenerate. Ow! Philippe cried out. The men in the front of the establishment turned to look where the sound was coming from. Listen, boy. By the power vested in me, do you swear to honor, cherish, love, and keep this girl until you die? Old Bookie looked at him seriously. If not longer, Philippe said, nodding. Fine by me. A voice sounded from the door. Don Foyetti coming into view. A warm body's a warm body. Old Book from the other side looks at the two, then mouths to Philippe. Kiss her. Philippe leans down and kisses Alba's tender lips. Her eyes flutter open and she kisses him back. Whoa, wait, what's going on here? Don fully moves closer, then sees Alba's eyes open. Then he turns to Felipe. You're breaking my heart, boy! Then he clutches his chest and falls to his knees. This is the girl I proposed to, father, the one I wish to marry, Felipe answered. What? No, you bastard kid, you wished it? He clutches his chest more, falling back. His men look into the room, then scatter, rushing past the reviving familia in the restaurant. If your mum was still around... Don Foyetti falls silent, then lays prone on the floor. The Don and his daughter rush into the kitchen to see their daughter standing, holding hands with Felipe, and old Bookie smiling as he just fades from view. The familia embraces, father, mother, daughter, son, and now son-in-law. And you knows what? They lived happily ever after. Now get your butts to bed, Bambinos, before I tan them for you. Okay, I feel better having done that now. But now, we can get into our regular scheduled stories. Okay, I'm definitely going to have to caption that one. Let's see. Oh, this is interesting. You're actually getting stories of Arthur Conan Doyle in this book. And these would be non-Sherlock Holmes. Because Arthur Conan Doyle was actually getting a little tired of Sherlock Holmes, and he had to do some variety. So our first story for rivals of Sherlock Holmes for this night, Round the Fire, Part 2. The story of the man with the watches. There were many who will still bear in mind the singular circumstances which, under the heading of Rugby Mystery, filled many columns of the daily press in the spring of the year 1892. Coming as it did at a period of exceptional dullness, it attracted perhaps rather more attention than it deserved. But it offered to the public that mixture of whimsical and the tragic which is most stimulating to the popular imagination. Interest drooped, however, when, after weeks of fruitless investigation, it was found that no final explanation of the facts was forthcoming, and the tragedy seemed from time to the present this having taken its place in the dark catalogue of inexplicable and unexplained crimes. A recent communication, the authority of which appears to be above question, has, however, thrown some light and new upon the matter. Before laying it before the public, it would be as well, perhaps, that I should refresh the memories as to the singular facts upon which this commentary is founded. These facts were as briefly follows. At 5 o'clock in the evening of March 18th, in the year already mentioned, a train left Euston Station for Manchester. It was a rainy, squally day which grew wilder as it progressed, so it was by no means the weather in which anyone would travel who was not driven to do so by necessity. The train, however, is a favorite among Manchester businessmen who are returning from town, for it does the journey in 4 hours and 20 minutes, with only 3 stoppages upon the way. In spite of the inclement evening, it was, therefore, fairly well filled upon the occasion on which I speak. The guard of the train was a tired servant of the company, a man who had worked for 22 years without blemish or complaint. His name was John Palmer. The station clock was upon the stroke of 5, and the guard was about to give the customary signal to the engine driver when he observed 2 belated passengers hurrying down the platform. One was an exceptionally tall man, dressed in a long black overcoat with an astrakhan collar and cuffs. I've already said that in the evening, an inclement one, and the tall traveler had a high, warm collar turned up to protect his throat against the bitter March wind. He appeared, as far as to the guard could judge, to be hurried in inspection. To be a man in between 50 and 60 years of age, who had retained a good deal of his vigor and activity of his youth. In one hand he carried a brown leather Gladstone bag. The companion was a lady, tall and erect, walking with a vigorous step which outpaced the gentleman beside her. She wore a long, fawn-colored dust cloak, a black, close-fitting toque, and a dark veil which concealed the greater part of her face. The two might very well have passed for father and daughter. They walked swiftly down the line of carriages, glancing in windows until the guard, John Palmer, overtook them. "Now then, sir, look sharp. The train is going," he said. "First class," the man answered. The guard turned the handle of the nearest door. In the carriage which he had opened, there sat a small man with a cigar in his mouth. His appearance seemed to have been impressed itself upon the guard's memory, for he was prepared afterwards to describe or to identify him. He was a man of 34 or 35 years of age, dressed in some gray material, sharp-nosed, alert, with a ruddy, weather-beaten face and a small, closely cropped black beard. He glanced as the door was opened. The tall man paused with his foot upon the step. "This is the smoking compartment. The lady dislikes smoke," he said, looking round to the guard. "Oh, right, here you are, sir," said John Palmer. He slammed the door of the smoking carriage, opened that of the next one, which was empty, and thrust the 2 travelers in. At the same moment, he sounded his whistle, and the wheels of the train began to move. The man with the cigar was at the window of his carriage, and had said something to the guard as he rolled past him, but the words were lost in the bustle of the departure. Palmer stepped into the guard's van as it came up to him, and thought no more of the incident. 12 minutes after its departure, the train reached Whistledown Junction, where it stopped for a very short interval. An examination of the tickets has it made certain that no one either joined or left it at this time, and no passenger was seen to alight upon the platform. At 5:14, the journey to Manchester was resumed, and Rugby was reached at 6:50, the express being 5 minutes late. At Rugby, the attention of the station officials was drawn to the fact that the door of one of the first-class carriages was open. An examination of the compartment and of its neighbor disclosed the remarkable state of affairs. The smoking carriage in which the short, red-faced man with a black beard had been seen was now empty. Save for a half-smoked cigar, there was no trace whatever of its recent occupants. The door of the carriage was fastened. In the next compartment, to which attention had been originally drawn, there was no sign either of the gentleman with the astrakhan collar or of the young lady who accompanied him. All the 3 passengers had disappeared. On the other hand, there was found upon the floor of this carriage, the one in which all of the traveler and the lady had been in, a young man, fashionably dressed and of an elegant appearance. He lay with his knees drawn up and his head resting against the further door, an elbow upon either seat. A bullet had penetrated his heart, and his death must have been instantaneous. No one had seen such a man enter the train, no railway ticket was found in his pocket, nor were there any markings upon his linen, nor papers of personal property, which might be help to identify him. Who was he? Whence had he come? And how had he met his end? Were such a great mystery as what had occurred to the three people who had started an hour and a half before Rosenden in those two compartments. I've said that there was no personal property which might help to identify him, but it is true that there was one peculiarity about his unknown man which was commented upon much of the time. In his pockets were found no fewer than 6 valuable gold watches, 3 in the various pockets of his waistcoat, 1 in his ticket pocket, 1 in his breast pocket, and 1 fastened around his wrist. The obvious explanation was that the man was a pickpocket, and that this was his plunder. It was discounted by the fact that all 6 were American make, and of a type which is rare in England. 3 of them bore the mark of the Rochester Watchmaking Company. 1 was by Mason of Elmira, 1 was unmarked, and the small one, which was highly jeweled and ornamented, was from Tiffany of New York. The other contents of his pockets consisted of an ivory knife with a corkscrew by Rogers and Sheffield, a small circular mirror 1 inch in diameter, a readmission slip to the Lyceum Theatre, a silver box of Vesta matches, and a brown leather cigar case containing 2 caroots, also £2 14 shillings in money. It was clear that whatever motives may have led to his death, robbery was not among them. As already mentioned, there were no markings upon the man's linen, which appeared to be new, and no tailor's name upon his coat. In appearance he was young, short, smooth-cheeked, and delicately featured. One of his front teeth was conspicuously stopped with gold. On the discovery of this tragedy, an examination was instantly made of the tickets of all passengers, and the number of the passengers themselves was counted. It was found that only 3 tickets were unaccounted for, corresponding to the 3 travelers who were missing. The express was then allowed to proceed, but a new guard was sent in with it, and John Palmer was detained as a witness at Rugby. The carriage, which included the 2 compartments in question, was uncoupled and sidetracked. Then, on the arrival of Inspector Vane of Scotland Yard, and of Mr. Henderson, a detective in the service of the railway company, an exhaustive inquiry was made into all the circumstances. That crime had been committed was certain. The bullets, which appeared to have come from a small pistol or revolver, had been fired from some little distance, as there was no scorching on the clothes. No weapon was found in the compartment, which finally disposed of the theory of suicide, nor was there any sign of the brown leather bag which the guard had seen in the hand of the tall gentleman. The lady's parasol was found upon the rack, but no other trace was to be seen of the travelers in either of the sections. Apart from the crime, the question of how or why the 3 passengers, one of them a lady, could get out in the rain, and one other get in during the unbroken run between Windleston and Rugby, was one which excited the utmost curiosity among the general public. It gave rise to much speculation in the London press. John Palmer, the guard, was able to, at the inquest, give some evidence which threw a little light upon the matter. There was a spot between Tring and Sheddington, according to his statement, where, on account of some repairs to the line, the train had a few minutes slowed down to a pace not exceeding 8 and 10 miles an hour. At that place it might be possible for a man, or even for an exceptionally active woman, to have left the train without serious injury. It was true that the gang of platelayers was there, and that they had seen nothing, but it was their custom to stand in the middle between the metals, and the open carriage was upon the far side, so that it was conceivable that someone might have alighted unseen, and the darkness would by that time be drawing in. A steep embankment would instantly screen anyone who sprang out from the observation of the nighters. The guard also deposed that there was a good deal of movement on the platform at Wildersham Junction, and that, though it was certain that no one had either joined or left the train there, it was quite possible that some of the passengers might have changed unseen from one compartment to another. It was by no means uncommon for a gentleman to finish his cigar in a smoking carriage and then to change to a clear atmosphere. Supposing that man with the black beard had done so at Wilderson, and the half-smoked cigar upon the floor seems to favor this supposition, would naturally go into the nearest section, which would bring him into the company of the two other actors in this drama. Thus the first stage of the affair might be surmised without any great breach of probability. But what the second stage had been, or how the final one had been, arrived at, neither the guard nor the experienced detective officers could suggest. A careful examination of the line between Wilsenden and Rugby resulted in not discovery which might or might not have bearing in on the tragedy. Near Tring, the very place where the train slowed, there was found at the bottom of an embankment a small pocket testament, very shabby and worn. It was printed by the Bible Society of London and bore the inscription, "From John to Alice, January 13th, 1856." Upon the flyleaf, underneath was written, "James, July 4th, 1859." And beneath that again, "Edward, November 1st, 1869." All the entries being in the same handwriting. This was the only clue, if it could be called a clue, which the police obtained, and the coroner's verdict of "murder by a person or persons unknown" was an unsatisfactory ending in a singular case. Advertisements, rewards, and inquiries proved equally fruitless, as nothing could be found which was solid enough to form the basis of a profitable investigation. It would be a mistake, however, to suppose that no theories were formed to account for the facts. On the contrary, the press, both in England and in America, teemed with suggestions and suppositions, most of which were obviously absurd. The fact that the watches were of American make and some peculiarities in the connection with the gold stopping at his front tooth appeared to indicate that the deceased was a citizen of the United States, though his linen, clothes, and boots were undoubtedly of British manufacture. It was surmised by some that he was concealed under the seat, and that being discovered, he was for some reason, probably because he had overheard their guilty secrets, put to death by the fellow passengers. When coupled with the generalities of the ferocity and the cunning anarchical and other secret societies, this theory sounded as plausible as any. The fact that he should be without a ticket would be consistent with the idea of concealment, and it was well known that the women played a prominent part of the nihilistic propaganda. On the other hand, it was clear from the guard's statement that the man must have been hidden there before the others arrived. And how unlikely the coincidence that conspirators should stray exactly into the very compartment in which a spy was already concealed. Besides, this explanation ignored the man in the smoking carriage and gave no reason at all for his simultaneous disappearance. The police had little difficulty in showing that such a theory could not cover the facts, but they were unprepared in the absence of evidence to advance any alternative explanation. There was a letter in the Daily Gazette over the signature of a well-known criminal investigator, which gave rise to considerable discussion at the time. He had formed a hypothesis which had at least ingenuity to recommend it, and I cannot do better than to apprehend it in his own words. "Whatever may be the truth," he said, "it must depend upon some bizarre and rare combination of events, so we need to have no hesitation in postulating such events in our explanation. In the absence of data, we must abandon the analytic or scientific method of investigation, and we must approach it in a synthetic fashion. In a word, instead of taking known events and deducing from them what has occurred, we must build up a fanciful explanation if it will only be consistent with the known events. We can then test the explanation by any fresh facts which may arrive. If they all fit into their places, the probability is that we were upon the right track. And with each fresh fact, this probability increases in a geometrical progression until the evidence becomes final and convincing." Now, there is one most remarkable suggestive fact which has not met with the attention in which it deserves. There is a local train running through Harrow and King's Lane, which is timed in such a way that the express must have overtaken it, or about the period when it eased down to a speed of 8 miles an hour on account of the repairs of the line. Two trains would at that time be traveling in the same direction at a similar rate of speed and upon parallel lines. It is within everyone's experience how, under such circumstances, the occupant of each carriage can see very plainly the passengers of the other carriages opposite them. The lamps of the express had been lit at Wildenton, so that each compartment was brightly illuminated, and most visible to an observer from outside. Now, the sequence of events I reconstruct them will be after this fashion. The young man with the abnormal number of watches was alone in a carriage of the slow train. His tickets with his papers and gloves and other things was, we shall suppose, on the seat beside him. He was probably an American, and also probably a man of weak intellect. The excessive wearing of jewelry is an early symptom in some forms of mania. As he sat watching the carriages on the express, which, on the account of the state of the line, were going at the same pace as himself, he suddenly saw some people in it whom he knew. We will suppose, for our sake, that the theory that these people were a woman whom he loved and a man whom he hated, and who in turn hated him. The young man was excitable and impulsive. He opened the door for his carriage and stepped from the footboard of the local train to the footboard of the express, opened the other door, and made his way into the presence of these two people. The feat, on the supposition that the trains were going at the same pace, is by no means so perilous as it might appear. Having now got our young man without his ticket in the carriage, in which the elder man and the young woman are traveling, it is not difficult to imagine that a violent scene ensued. It is possible that the pair were also Americans, which is more probable as the man carried a weapon, an unusual thing in England. If our supposition is in septimania is correct, the young man is likely to have assaulted the other. As the upshot of the quarrel, the elder man shot the intruder, then made his escape from the carriage, taking the young lady with him. We will suppose that this all happened very rapidly, and that the train was still going at a very slow pace, as it is not difficult for them to leave it. The woman might leave a train going at 8 miles an hour. A matter of fact, we know that this woman did so. And now we have to fit the man in the smoking carriage. Presuming that we have, up to this point, reconstructed the tragedy correctly, we shall find nothing in this other man to cause us to reconsider our conclusions. According to my theory, this man saw the young fellow cross from one train to the other, saw him open the door, heard the pistol shot, saw the two fugitives spring out to the line, realized the murder had been done, and sprang out himself in pursuit. Why he has never been heard of since, whether he might have met his death in the pursuit, or whether, as is more likely, he was made to realize that it was not a case for his interference, is a detail which we have present no means of explaining. I acknowledge that there are some difficulties in that way. At first sight, it might seem improbable that such a moment of murderer would broad himself in this light with a plastic brown leather bag. My answer is that he was well aware that if the bag were found, his identity would be established. It was absolutely necessary for him to take it with him. My theory stands or falls upon one point, and I call upon the railway company to make strict inquiry as to whether a ticket was found unclaimed in the local train through Harrow and King's Langley upon the 18th of March. If such a ticket were found, my case is proved. If not, my theory may still be a correct one, for it is conceivable either that he traveled without a ticket, or that he left his tickets for lost. To this elaborate and plausible hypothesis, the answer of the police and the company was, first, that no such ticket was found; secondly, that the slow train would never run parallel to the express; and thirdly, that the local train had been stationed at King Langley Station when the express, going at 50 miles an hour, had flashed past it. Night, Doctor. So appears the only satisfactory explanation, and 5 years have elapsed without supplying a new one. Now at last there comes a statement which covers all the facts, and which must be regarded as authentic. It took the shape of a letter dated from New York and addressed to the same criminal investigator whose theory I have quoted. It is given here in extenso, in the exception of the two opening paragraphs, which are personal in their nature. You'll excuse me if I'm not very free with names. There's less reason now than there was 5 years ago when Mother was still living. But for all that, I'd rather cover up our tracks all I can. But I owe you an explanation. For if your idea of it was wrong, it was a mighty ingenious one all the same. I'll have to go back a little so you may understand all about it. My people came from Bucks, England, and immigrated to the States in the early 50s. They settled in Rochester and then stayed in New York, where my father ran a large dry goods store. There were only 2 sons, myself, James, and my brother Edward. I was 10 years older than my brother, and after my father died, I sort of took the place of a father to him, as an elder brother would. He was a bright, spirited boy, and just one of the most beautiful creatures that ever lived. But there was always a soft spot in him, and it was like mold and cheese, for it spread, and nothing that you could do would stop it. Mother saw it just as clearly as I did, but she went on spoiling him all the same, for he had such a way with him that you could refuse him nothing. I did all I could to hold him in, but he hated me for my pains. At last he fairly got in his head, and nothing that we could do to stop him. He got off into New York, and went rapidly from bad to worse. At first he was only fast, and then a criminal. Then, at the end of a year or two, he was one of the most notorious young crooks in the city. He was formed a friendship with Sparrow McCoy, who was at the head of the profession as a bunco steerer, green goodsman, and general rascal. They took to card sharping and frequently some of the best hotels in New York. My brother was an excellent actor. He might have made an honest name for himself if he had chosen, and he would take the parts of a young Englishman of title and of a simple lad from the West, or of a college undergraduate, whatever suited Sparrow McCoy's purpose. And then one day he dressed himself as a girl, and he carried it off so well that he made such himself a valuable decoy that if it was their favorite game afterwards, they had made it right with Tammany and with the police, so it seemed that nothing could ever stop them. Those were the days before the Lennox Commission, and if you could only had a pull off, you could do pretty much anything you wanted. And nothing would have stopped them if they had only struck the cards in New York, but they must needs to come up to Rochester way and forge a new name on a check. It was my brother that did that, though everyone knew it was under the influence of Sparrow McCoy. I brought up the check, and a pretty sum it cost me. Then I went to my brother, laid it before him on the table, and swore to him that I would not prosecute if he did not clear out of the country. At first he simply laughed. I could not prosecute, he said, without breaking our mother's heart, and he knew that I would not do that. I made him understand, however, that our mother's heart was being broken in any case, and that I had set firm on the point that I would rather see him in Rochester jail than in a New York hotel. So at last he gave in, and he made me a solemn promise that he would see Sparrow McCoy no more, and that he would go to Europe, and that he would turn his hand to any honest trade that helped him get it. I took him down right away to an old family friend, Joe Wilson, who was an exporter of American watches and clocks, and I got him to give Edward an agency in London with a small salary and a 5% commission on all business. His manner and his appearance were so good that he won the old man over at once, and within a week he was sent off to London with a case full of samples. It seemed to me that the business of the check had really given my brother a fright, and that there was some chance of his settling into an honest line of life. My mother had spoken to him, and she said that she had touched him, for she had always been the best of mothers to him, and he had been the great sorrow of her life. But I knew that this man, Sparrow McCoy, had a great influence over Edward, and my chance of keeping the lad straight lay in keeping a connection between them. I had a friend in the New York detective force, and through him I kept a watch on McCoy. And within a fortnight of my brother's sailing, I heard that McCoy had taken a berth at Trina. I was certain, if he had told me that he was going over to England for the purpose of coaxing Edward back again into the ways that he had just left. In an instant I had resolved to go also, and I put my influence against McCoy's. I knew it was a losing fight, but I thought that, and my mother thought, that if it was my duty. We passed the last night together in prayer for my success, and she gave me her own testament that my father had given her on the days of their marriage in the old country, so that I might always wear it next to my heart. I was a fellow traveler on a steamship with Sparrow McCoy, and at least I had the satisfaction of spoiling his little game for the voyage. But the very first night I went to the smoking room and found him at the head of a card table, with half a dozen young followers who were carrying their full purses and their empty skulls over to Europe. He was settling down for his harvest, and a rich one it would have been too, but I soon changed all of that. "Gentlemen," I said, "are you aware with whom you are playing?" "What's that to you? Mind your own business," he said with an oath. "Who is it anyway?" asked one of the dudes. "He's Sparrow McCoy, the most notorious card sharper in the States." Up he jumped with a bottle in hand, but he remembered that he was under the flag of an effete old country, where law and order and tammany was no pull. Jail and the gallows wait for violence and murder, and there's no slipping out the back door on board an ocean liner. "Prove your words, you," he said. "I will," said I. "If you will turn up your right sleeve to his shoulder, I will prove either my words or I will eat them." He turned white and said not a word. You see, I knew something of his ways, and I was aware that he kept part of a mechanism which he and all such sharpers were consistent to elastic down the arm with a clip just above the wrist. It is by means of this clip that they withdraw from their hands the cards which they do not want, while they substitute other cards from other hiding place. I reckoned on it being there, and it was. He cursed me and slunk out of the saloon, and was hardly seen again during the voyage. For once, at any rate, I got level with Mr. Sparrow McCoy. But he was soon his revenge on me, for when it came to influencing my brother, he outweighed me every time. Edward had kept himself straight in London for the first few weeks, and had done some business with his American watches until this villain came across his path once more. I did my best, but the best was little enough. And next thing I heard, there was been a scandal in one of the Northumberland Avenue hotels. A traveler had been fleeced of a large sum of money by two Confederate card sharp players. The matter was in the hands of Scotland Yard. The first I learned of it was in the evening paper, and I was at once certain that my brother and McCoy were back at their old games. I hurried at once to Edward's lodgings. They told me that he had been with a tall gentleman, whom I recognized as McCoy, had gone off together, and that he had left his lodgings and taken his things with him. The landlady had heard them give several directions to a cabman ending in Euston Station, and she had accidentally overheard the tall gentleman saying something about Manchester. She believed that this was their next destination. A glance at the timetable showed me the most likely train was at 5, though there was another at 4:35 which might have caught. I had only time to get to the latter one, but found no sign of them either in the depot or in the train. They must have gone on the earlier one, so I determined to follow them to Manchester and search them for the hotels there. One last appeal to my brother, by all that he owed to my mother, might even now be the salvation of him. My nerves were overstrung, and I lit a cigar to steady them. At that moment, just as the train was moving off, the door of my compartment was flung open, and there were McCoy and my brother on the platform. They were both disguised, and with good reason, for they knew that the London police were after them. McCoy had great astrakhan collar cut drawn up, so that only his eyes and nose were showing. My brother was dressed like a woman with a black veil half down his face, but of course it did not deceive me for an instant, nor would it have done so even if I had not known that he had so often done such a dress before. I started up, and I did as McCoy recognized me. He said something to the conductor, and he slammed the door again. They were shown to the next compartment. I tried to stop the train as to follow them, but the wheels were already moving, and it was too late. When we stopped at Wilsondon, I instantly changed my carriage. It appears that I was not seen doing so, which is not surprising as the station was crowded by people. McCoy, of course, was expecting me, and had spent the time between Euston and Wilson saying all he could to harden my brother's heart and set him against me. That is what I fancy, for I had never found him so impossible to soften to move. I tried this way and then tried that, and pictured the future of the English jail, and I described the sorrow of his mother when I came back with the news. I said everything to touch his heart, but all to no purpose. He sat there with a fixed sneer upon his handsome face, while every now and then Sparrow McCoy would throw in a taunt to me and some word of encouragement to hold my brother to his resolutions. "Why don't you run a Sunday school?" he would say to me, and then, in the same breath, "He thinks you have no will of your own. He thinks you are just a baby brother that he can lead where he likes. He's only just finding out that you are a man as well as he." It was words of his which set me talking bitterly. We left Wilsondon, as you understand, for all this took some time. My temper got the better of me, and for the first time in my life I let my brother see the rough side of me. Perhaps it would have been better had I done so earlier and more often. "A man," I said. "Well, I'm glad to be your friend's assurance of it, for no one would suspect you of seeing a boarding school missy. I don't suppose in all this country there's a more contemptible-looking creature than you are as you sit there, that dolly pinafore upon you." He colored up to that, for he was a vain man, and he winced from ridicule. "It's only a dust cloak," he said, and he slipped it off. "One has to throw the coppers off one's scent, and I had other ways to do it." I took his toque off with a veil attached, and he put both on the cloak in his brown bag. "Anyway, I don't need to wear it until the conductor comes around," he said. "Not then either," I said, and taking the bag I slung it with all my force out the window. "Now," said I, "prove you'll never make a Mary Jane of yourself while I can help it. If nothing but that disguise stands between you and jail, then to jail you shall go." That was the way to manage him. I felt my advantage at once. The supple nature was one which yielded to roughness far more readily than to entreaty. He flushed with shame, and his eyes filled with tears. But McCoy saw my advantage also, and was determined that I should not pursue it. "Here's my part, and you shall not bully him," he cried. "He is my brother, and you should not ruin him," said I. "I believe a spell of prison is the very best way of keeping you apart, and you shall have it, or it will be no fault of mine." "Oh, you would squeal, would you?" he cried. In an instant he whipped out his revolver. I sprang for his hand, but saw that I was too late and jumped aside. At the same instant he fired. The bullet which would have struck me passed through the heart of my unfortunate brother. He dropped without a groan upon the floor of the compartment, and McCoy and I, equally horrified, knelt at each side of him, trying to bring back some signs of life. McCoy still held the loaded revolver in his hand, but his anger against me and my resentment towards him had both for the moment been swallowed up by the sudden tragedy. It was he who first realized the situation. The train was, for some reason, going very slowly at the moment, and he saw his opportunity for escape. In an instant, he had the door open. But I was as quick as he, and jumping upon him, the two of us fell off the footboard and rolled in each other's arms down the steep embankment. At the bottom, I struck my head against a stone, and remembered nothing more. When I came to myself, I was lying amongst... some low bushes, not far from the railway track, and somebody was bathing my head with a wet handkerchief. It was Sparrow McCoy. "I guess I couldn't leave you," said he. "I didn't want to leave the blood of two of you on my hands in one day. You loved your brother, I have no doubt, but you didn't love him a cent more than I loved him, though you'll say I took a queer way to show it. Anyhow, it seems a mighty empty world now that he's gone, and I don't care a continental whether you give me over the hangman or not. He had turned his ankle in the fall, and there we sat, he with his useless foot, and me with my throbbing head, and we talked and talked until gradually my bitterness towards him softened and turned to something more of sympathy. What was the use of revenging his death upon a man who was such stricken by his death as I was? And then, as my wits gradually returned, I began to realize also that I could do nothing against McCoy, which would not recoil upon my brother and myself. How... Thank you for the bits. How could we convict him without a full account of my brother's career being made the public, the very thing which all others we had to avoid? It was really as much our interest as his to cover the matter up, and from being an avenger of crime I found myself changed to a conspirator against justice. The place in which we found ourselves was one of those pleasant preserves which are so common in the old country, and as we groped our way through it, I found myself consulting the slayer of my brother as to how far it would be possible to hush it up. I soon realized from what he had said that unless there were some papers on which we knew nothing in his brother's pockets, there was really no possible means by which the police could identify him or learn how he got there. His ticket was in McCoy's pocket, and so was a ticket of some baggage which they had left at the depot. Like most Americans, he found it cheaper and easier to buy an outfit in London than to bring one from New York, so that all his linen and clothes were new and unmarked. The bag containing the dust cloak, which I had thrown out the window, may have fallen among the bramble patch where it is still concealed, or it may have been carried off by some tramp, or may have come into the possession of police who kept the incident to themselves. Anyhow, I've seen nothing about it in the London papers. As to the watches, they were selections from those which had been entrusted to him by business purposes. It may have been for the same business purposes that he was taking them to Manchester, but, well, it's too late to enter into that. I don't blame the police for being at fault. I don't see how it could have been otherwise. There's just one little clue that might have followed up, but that was a small one. I mean that the silver circular mirror that was found in my brother's pocket. It isn't a very common thing for a young man to carry about with him, is it? But a gambler might have told you that which a mirror may mean to a card sharper. If you sit back a little away from the table and lay the mirror face upwards upon your lap, you can see as the detail of every card you give to your adversary. It is not hard to say whether you see a man to raise him when you know his cards as well as your own. It was as much a part of the sharper's outfit as the elastic clip on McCoy's armband. Taking that in connection with the recent frauds at the hotel was the police might have got a hold of one end of the string. I don't think there is much more for me to explain. We got to the village called Amerstan that night in the character of two gentlemen walking upon the tour, and afterwards we made our way quietly to London, whence McCoy went on to Cairo, and I returned to New York. My mother died 6 months afterwards, and I'm glad to say that to this day of her death, she never knew what happened. She was always under the delusion that Edward was learning an honest living in London, and I never had the heart to tell her the truth. He never wrote, but then he never did write at any time, so that made no difference. His name was the last upon her lips. There's just one other thing I have to ask you, sir, and should I take it as a kind of return for this explanation if you would do it to me. You remember the testament that was picked up? I always carried it in my inside pocket, and it must have come out during my fall. I value it highly, for it was a family book of my birth, and my brother's marked by my father at the beginning of it. I wish you would simply apply the proper place and have it sent to me. It can be no possible value to anyone else. If you address it to X, Persano's Library, Broadway, New York, it is sure to come to my hand. Okay, that was an interesting story. Ouch. And thank you for the bits, Oni, and congrats on first Taka and second Oni. Thank you for coming in. Yes, hydrating is important. So what did you think of the story? And did you get to hear the original story? If not, I'll go ahead and highlight it and put it in a special folder, I guess. Oh, it's been an hour. It looks like the ads have already run. Yeah, it's saying that 57 minutes without pre-roll, so I guess we're good. That was a Arthur Conan Doyle story that was not Sherlock Holmes. And you can just tell by the writing that it's him. Not too bad. Since the ads have already run, I'm going to go ahead and keep going into it. And I hydrated, so. And it's interesting that both the sound alerts and... Which one did you play on me? I think that was one of the burp sounds, wasn't it? Oh, what? The walk-in worked. Okay. That's what that was. Hey, guilty. Now I'll get into the second non-Sherlock Holmes Arthur Conan Doyle story. Again, apparently from Round of the Fire. Number 3. The Story of the Lost Special. The confession of Herbert de Lerac, now lying under sentence of death at Marseille, has thrown a light upon the most inexplicable crimes of the century, An incident which is, I believe, absolutely unprecedented in the criminal annals of any country. Although there is a reluctance to discuss the matter in official circles, little information has been given to the press. There are still indications that the statement of this arch-criminal is corroborated by the facts that he would have at last found the solution for the most astounding business. As a matter of 8 years old, and its importance was somewhat obscured by the political crisis which was engaging the public attention at the time, it may well be to state the facts as far as we have been able to ascertain them. They are collated from the Liverpool papers of the dates, from the proceedings of the inquest of John Slater, the engine driver, and from the records of London and West Coast Railway Company, which have been courteously but at the disposal. Briefly, they are as follows. On the 3rd of June, 1890, a gentleman who gave his name as Monsieur Louis Catterall desired to interview with Mr. James Bland, the superintendent of the Central London and West Coast Station of Liverpool. He was a small man, middle-aged and dark, with a stoop which so marked that suggested some deformity of the spine. He was accompanied by a friend, a man of imposing physique whose deferential manner and constant attention suggested that he was in the position was one of dependence. This friend or companion, whose name did not transpire, was certainly a foreigner, probably from a swarthy complexion, either Spaniard or South American. One peculiarity was observed in him. He carried in his left hand a small black leather dispatch box, and on it was noticed by the sharp-eyed clerk of the central office that this box was fastened to his wrists by a strap. No importance was attached to the fact at this time, but subsequent events endowed it with some significance. Monsieur Carreteau was shown up to Mr. Bland's office, while his companion remained outside. Monsieur Carreteau's business was quickly dispatched. He had arrived that afternoon from Central America. Affairs of the utmost importance demanded that he should be in Paris without the loss of any unnecessary hour. He had missed the London express. A special must be provided. Money was of no importance. Time was everything. And the company would speed him on his way. They might make their own terms. Mr. Bland struck the electric bell and summoned Mr. Potterhood, the traffic manager, and had the matter arranged in 5 minutes. The train would start in 3/4 of an hour, and would take the time to ensure that the line would be clear. The powerful engine, called Rochdale, number 247 on the company's register, was attached to 2 carriages, with a man's guard van behind. The first carriage was solely for the purpose of decreasing the inconvenience arising from the oscillation. The second was divided, as usual, into 4 compartments. The first class smoking, the second class, and the second class smoking. The first compartment, which was the nearest to the engine, was the one allotted to the travelers. The other 3 remained empty. The guard of the special train was James McPherson, who had been some years in the service of the company. The stoker, William Smith, was a new hand. Monsieur Carreteau, upon leaving the superintendent's office, rejoined his companion, and both of them manifested extreme impatience to be off. Having paid the money asked, which amounted to £5, 5 shillings, and the usual special rate of 5 shillings a mile, they demanded to be shown to the carriage, and at once took their seats in it, although they were assured that the better part of an hour would elapse before the line could be cleared. In the meantime, a singular coincidence had occurred at the office which Monsieur Carreteau had just quitted. The request for a special is not a very uncommon circumstance in a rich commercial center, but that 2 should be required upon the same afternoon was most unusual. It so happened, however, that Mr. Bland had hardly dismissed the first traveler before the second entered to request similar. This was Mr. Harold Small, a gentlemanly man of military appearance, who alleged that the sudden illness of his wife in London made it absolutely imperative they should not lose an instant on arriving at the journey. His distress and anxiety were so evident that Mr. Bland did all that was possible to meet his wishes. A second special was out of the question, as the ordinary local service was already somewhat deranged from the first. There was an alternative, however. Mr. Moore could share the expense of Monsieur Carrothol's train and should travel in the other empty class compartments, if Monsieur Carrotol objected to having him in the one he occupied. It was difficult to see any objection in the arrangement, and yet Monsieur Carrotol, upon the suggestion being made to him by poor Mr. Potter Hood, absolutely refused to consider it for an instant. The train was his, he said, and he would insist upon an exclusive use of it. The argument failed to overcome his ungracious objections, and finally the plan had to be abandoned. Mr. Horace Moore left the station in great distress, after learning that his only course was to take an ordinary slow train which leaves Liverpool at 6 o'clock. At 4:31 exactly by the station clock, the special train containing the crippled Monsieur Carrotol and his gigantic companion steamed out of the Liverpool station. The line was at that time clear, and should have been no stoppage before Manchester. The trains of the London and West Coast Railway run over the lines of another company as far as this town, which should have been reached by the special before 6 o'clock. At 6:15, considerable surprise and some consternation was caused amongst the officials of Liverpool by the receipt of a telegram from Manchester to say that it had not yet arrived. An enquiry directed to St. Helens, which is a third of the way between the two cities, solicited the following reply. To James Bland, Superintendent, Central L&WC, Liverpool. Special passed here at 4:52, well up on time. Dowser, St. Helens. The telegram was received at 6:40. At 6:50, a second message was received from Manchester. No sign of special, as advised by you. And then 10 minutes later, a third, more bewildering. Presume some mistake as to proceed running of special. Local train from St. Helens arrived at the time just as it arrived, and is seeing nothing of it. Kindly wire advices. Manchester. The matter was assuming the most amazing aspect, although in some respects the last telegram was a relief to the authorities of Liverpool. If an accident had occurred to the special, it seemed hardly possible that the local train would pass down the same line without observing it. And yet, what was the alternative? Where could the train be? Had it possibly been sidetracked for some reason in order to allow a slower train to go past? Such an explanation was possible if some repair had to be effected. A telegram was dispatched to each of the stations between St. Helens and Manchester, and the superintendent and traffic manager waited in the utmost suspense at the instrument for the series of replies which would enable them to say for certain what had become of the missing train. The answers came back in the order of the questions, which was the order of the stations beginning at St. Helens. Special passed here at 5 o'clock, Collins Green. Special passed at 5:06, Earlstown. Special passed here 5:10, Newton. Special passed here 5:20, Kenyon Junction. No special train has passed here, Barton Moss. The two officials stared at each other in amazement. This is unique in my 30 years of experience, said Mr. Brett. Absolutely unprecedented. Inexplicable, sir. The special has gone wrong between Kenyon Junction and Barton Moss. And yet there's no siding, as far as my memory serves me, between the two stations. The special must have run off the rails. But how could the 450 Parliamentary pass over the same line without observing it? There's no alternative, Mr. Hood. It must be so. Possibly the local train may have observed something which may throw some light in the matter. We will wire Manchester for more information and to Kenyon Junction with instructions that the line be examined instantly as far as Barton Moss. The answer from Manchester came within a few minutes. No news of missing special. driver and guard of slow train positive that no accident between Kenyon Junction and Barton Moss. Line quite clear, and no sign of anything unusual. Manchester. The guard and driver will have to go, said Mr. Bland grimly. There's been a wreck and they've missed it. Special has obviously run off their metals without disturbing the line. How could it have done any passes my comprehension, but so it must be, and we shall have a wire from Kate and Barton Moss presently to say that they have found her at the bottom of an embankment. But Mr. Bland's prophecy was not destined to be fulfilled. A half hour passed, and then there arrived a following message from the station master at Kenyon Junction. There are no traces of missing Special. It is quite certain that she had passed here, and that she did not arrive at Barton Moss. We have a dispatched engine on from Goods train, and I have ridden myself down the line. But all is clear, and there is no sign of any accident. Mr. Bland tore his hair in his perplexity. This is lunacy, Hood, he cried. Does the train vanish in thin air in London in broad daylight? The thing is preposterous. An engine, a tender, 2 carriages, a van, 5 human beings, and all lost in a straight line of railway. Unless we get something positive within the next hour, I'll take Inspector Collins and go down myself. And then, at last, something positive did occur. It took shape of another telegram from Kenyon Junction. Regret to report that the dead body of John Slater, driver of the train special, has been found among the gorse bushes at points 2¼ miles from the junction. Had fallen from his engine, pitched down the embankment, and rolled among the bushes. Injuries to his head from the fall appear to be the cause of death. Ground has been carefully examined. There is no trace of the missing train. The country was, as has already been stated, in the throes of a political crisis, and the attention of the public was further distracted by the important and sensational developments in Paris, where a huge scandal threatened to destroy the government and wreck the reputations of many a leading man in France. The papers were full of these events, and the singular disappearance of the special train attracted less attention than would have been the case in more peaceful times. The grotesque nature of the event helped to detract from its importance, for the papers were disinclined to believe the facts as reported to them. More than one of the London journals treated the matter as an ingenious hoax, until the coroner's inquest upon the unfortunate driver, an inquest which elicited nothing of importance, convinced them of the tragedy of the incident. Mr. Bland, accompanied by Inspector Collins, the senior detective officer of the service of the company, went down to Kenyon Junction the same evening, and their research lasted throughout the following day, but was attended with purely negative results. Not only was no trace of the missing train, but no conjecture could be put forward which could possibly explain the facts. At the same time, Inspector Collins' official report, which lies before me as I write this, serves to show that the possibilities were none more numerous than might have been expected. On the stretch of railway between these 2 points, he said, the country is dotted with ironworks and collieries. Of these, some were being worked and some have been abandoned. There are no fewer than 12 of which small gauge lines which run trolley cars down to the main line. These can, of course, be disregarded. Besides these, however, there are 7 which have or had proper lines running down, connecting to the points of the main line, so to convey their produce to the mouth of the mine, to the great centers of distribution. In every case, these lines are only a few miles in length. Out of the 7, 4 belong to collieries which are out of work, or at least to shafts that no longer used. These are Red Gauntlet, Hero, Slough of Despond, and the Heartsease mines, the latter having 10 years ago been one of the principal mines in Lancashire. These 4 sidelines may be eliminated from inquiry, for to prevent possible accidents, the rail is nearest the main line have been taken up, and there are no longer in any connection. There remain 3 other side lines leading to the Carnstock Ironworks, to the Big Ben Colliery, and to the Preservation Colliery. Of these, the Big Ben line is not more than a quarter of a mile long and ends in a dead wall of coal, waiting removal from the mouth of the mine. Nothing can be seen or heard of any of the special. The Carnstock Ironworks line was blocked all day upon the 3rd of June by 16 truckloads of hematite. In a single line, nothing could have passed. As to the Perseverance line, it is a double line, which does considerable traffic, for the output of the mine is very large. On the 3rd of June, the traffic proceeded as usual. Hundreds of men, including a gang of railway plate workers, were working along the 2 miles and a quarter which constitute the total length of the line. And it is inconceivable that an unexpected train could have come down there without attracting universal attention. It may be remarked in conclusion that this branch line is nearer to St. Helens than to the point at which the engine driver was discovered, so that we have every reason to believe that the train was past the point before misfortune overtook her. As to John Slater, there is no clue to the gathered from his appearance or injuries. We can only say that, as far as we can see, he met his end by falling off his engine, though why he fell or what became of the engine after his fall is a question upon which I do not feel qualified to offer an opinion. In conclusion, the inspector offered his resignation to the board, being much nettled by his accusations of incompetence in the London papers. A month elapsed, during which both the police and the company prosecuted their inquiries without the slightest success. A reward was offered and a pardon promised in case of crime, but they were both unclaimed. Every day the public opened their papers with the convictions that so grotesque a mystery would at least have been solved. But week after week passed by, and the solution remained as far off as ever. In broad daylight, upon a June afternoon in the most thickly inhabited portion of England, a train with its occupants had disappeared as completely as if some master of sepal chemistry had volatilized it into gas. Indeed, among the various conjectures were put forward in the public press, there were some which seriously asserted the supernatural, or at least preternatural, agencies had been at work, and the deformed Monsieur Caratol was probably the person who was better known under a less polite name. Others fixed upon his swarthy companion as being the author of the mischief, but what it was exactly which he had done could never be clearly formulated in words. Amongst many other suggestions put forward by various papers or private individuals, there were 1 or 2 which were feasible enough to attract the attention of the public. One which appeared in the Times, over the signature of an amateur reasoner of some celebrity at that date, attempted to deal with the matter with a critical and semi-scientific manner. An extract must suffice, although the curious will see the whole letter on the issue of the 3rd of July. It is one of elementary principles among reasoning, he remarked, that when the impossible has been eliminated, the residuum, however improbable, must contain the truth. It is certain that the train left Caton Station. It is certain that it did not reach Barton Moss. It is in the highest degree unlikely, but still possible, that it may have been taken off the 7 available sidelines. It is obviously impossible for a train to run where there are no rails, and therefore we may deduce the improbabilities of the 3 open lines, namely the Carnstock Ironworks, the Big Ben, and the Perseverance. There is a secret society of colliers, an English camera, which is capable of destroying both train and passengers. It is improbable, but it is not impossible. I confess that I am unable to suggest other solution. I should certainly advise the company to direct all their energies towards the observation of those 3 lines, and to the workmen at the end of them. A careful supervision of the pawnbroker shops district might possibly bring some suggestive facts to mind. The suggestion coming from a recognized authority upon such matters created considerable interest. and a fierce opposition from those who considered such a statement to be preposterous and libel upon an honest and deserving set of men. The only answer to the criticism was a challenge to the objectors to lay any more feasible explanation before the public. In reply to this, the two others were forthcoming, the times July 7th and the 9th. The first suggested that the train might have run off the Meadows and be lying submerged in the Lancaster or Staffordshire Canal, which runs parallel to the railway for some 100 yards. This suggestion was thrown out of court by the published depth of the canal, which is entirely insufficient to conceal a large object. The second correspondent wrote, calling attention to the bag, which appeared to be the sole luggage of the travelers had brought with them, and suggested that some novel explosive or immense and pulverizing power might have been concealed in it. The obvious absurdity, however, of supposing that the whole train might be blown to dust while the Meadows remained uninjured, reduced any such explanations of farce. The investigation had drifted into the hopeless position when a new and most unexpected incident occurred, which raised the hopes never destined to be fulfilled. This was nothing less than the receipts by Mrs. McPherson of a letter from her husband, James McPherson, who had been the guard of the missing train. The letter, which was dated July 5th, 1890, was dispatched from New York and came to hand upon July 14th. Some doubts were expressed as to its genuine character, but Mrs. McPherson was positive as to the writing, and the fact that it contained a remittance of $100 and $5 notes was enough to itself discount the idea of a hoax. No address was given in the letter, which ran in this way. My dear wife, I've been thinking of you a great deal, and I find it very hard to give you up. The same with Lizzie. I try to fight against it, but it will always come back to me. I send you some money with which to exchange some £20 English notes. This should be enough to bring both Lizzie and yourself across the Atlantic, and you will find the Hamburg boats which stop at Southampton very good boats, and cheaper than Liverpool. If you could come here and stop at the Johnson House, I would try to send you word how to meet. But things are very difficult for nothing at present, and I am not very happy, finding it hard to give you both up. So, no more at present. Your loving husband, James McPherson. Thank you, Matthew. For a time, this was confidently anticipated that this letter would lead to the clearing up of the whole matter. And the more so, it was ascertained that the passenger who bore close resemblance to the missing guard had traveled from Southampton under the name of Summers in the Hamburg, a New York liner, Vistula, which started upon the 7th of June. Mrs. McPherson and her sister Lizzie Dalton went across to New York as instructed and stayed for 3 weeks at the Johnson House without hearing anything from the missing man. It is possible that some injurious comments in the press may have warned him that the police were using them as bait. However this may be, it is certain that he neither wrote nor came, and the women were eventually compelled to return to Liverpool. And so the matter stood, and has continued to stand up to the present year of 1898. Incredible as it may seem, nothing has transpired during these 8 years which has shed at least light on the extraordinary disappearance of a special train which contained Monsieur Caratal and his companion. Careful inquiries to the antecedents of the two travelers have only established the fact that Monsieur Caratal was well known as a financier and political agent of Central America, and that during his voyage to Europe he had betrayed extraordinary anxiety to reach Paris. His companion, whose name was entered upon the passenger list as Eduardo Gomez, was a man whose record was a violent one, and whose reputation was that of a bravo and a bully. There was evidence to show, however, that he was honestly devoted to the interests of Monsieur Caratal, and that the latter, being of a man of puny physique, employed the other as a guard and protector. It may be added that no information came from Paris as to the objects of Monsieur Caratal's hurried journey may have been. This compromises all the facts of the case, the publication of Marseille papers, and the recent confession of Herbert de Lenac, who, under sentence of death for the murder of a merchant named Bonnevat. This statement may be literally translated as follows. It's not out of mere pride or boasting that I give this information, for if that were my object, I could tell you a dozen actions of mine which are quite as splendid. But I do in order to certain gentlemen in Paris may understand that I, who am able to be here, tell about the fate of Monsieur Caratal, and also tell in whose interests and at whose request the deed was done, unless the reprieve I am awaiting comes to me very quickly. Take warning, monsieurs, before it is too late. You know Herbert de Lernac, and you are aware that his deeds are ready as his words. Hasten in, or you are lost. At present I shall mention no names. If you only heard the names, what would you not think? But I shall merely tell you how cleverly I did it. I was true to my employers then, and no doubt they will be true to me now. I hope so, and until I am convinced that they have betrayed me, those names, which would convulse Europe, shall not be divulged. But on that day, well, I say no more. In a word, then, there was a famous trial in Paris in the year of 1890 in connection with a monstrous scandal in politics and finance. How monstrous that scandal was can never be known save by such confidential agents as myself. The honor and careers of many of the chief men in France were at stake. You have seen a group of ninepins standing, all so rigid and prim and unbending. Then here comes a ball from far away, and pop, 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 there are your 9 pins on the floor. Well, imagine some of the greatest men in France as these 9 pins. And then this Monsieur Caratal was a ball which could be coming from far away. If he arrived, then it was pop, pop, pop for all of them. It was determined that he should not arrive. I do not accuse them all of being conscious of what happened. There were, as I have said, great financial and, well, political interests at stake, and a significance was formed to manage the business. Some subscribed to the syndicates who hardly understood what it was objects, but others understood very well, and they can all reply upon it that I have not forgotten their names. They had ample warning that Monsieur Caratal was coming long before he left South America, and they knew that the evidence which he held would certainly mean ruin to them all. The syndicates had a command of an unlimited amount of money. Absolutely unlimited, you understand. They looked round for an agent who was capable of wielding this gigantic power. The man chosen would be inventive, resolute, adaptive. A man in a million. And they chose Herbert de Lernac, and I admit that they were right. My duties were to choose my subordinates and use freely the power which money gives, and to make certain that Monsieur Caratal should never arrive in Paris. The characteristic energy I set about my commission within an hour of receiving my instructions, and the steps which I took were the very best for the purpose which I could possibly be devised. A man whom I could trust was dispatched instantly to South America to travel home with Monsieur Caratal. He had arrived in time and the ship would never have reached Liverpool, but alas, it had already started before my agent could reach it. I fitted out a small armed brig to accept it, but again I was unfortunate. Like all great organizers, I was, however, prepared for failure, and I had a series of alternatives prepared, one or the other of which must succeed. You must not undertake the difficulties of my understanding, or imagine that a mere commonplace assassin would be the best. We must destroy not only Monsieur Caratal, but Monsieur Caratal's documents, and Monsieur Caratal's companions too, if we had reason to believe that they had communicated his secrets with them. And you must remember that they were on the alert and keenly suspicious of any such attempt. It was a task which was in every way worthy of me, and I am always most masterful whereupon would be appalled. I was all ready for Monsieur Caratal's reception in Liverpool, and I was more eager because I had reason to believe that he had made arrangements by which he would have a considerable guard from the moment that he arrived in London. Anything which was to be done must be done between the moment of his setting foot in Liverpool Quay and that of his arrival in London and West Coast Terminus in London. We prepared 6 plans, each more elaborate than the last. Which plan would be used would depend upon my own motives. What we would, we were ready for him. If he stayed in Liverpool, we were ready. If he took an ordinary train, an express, or a special, all was ready. Everything had been foreseen and provided for. You may imagine that I could not do all this by myself. What could I know about the English railway lines? But money can provide leading agents all over the world, and I had soon one of the best and acutest brands in England to assist me. I will mention no names, but it would be unjust to claim all the credit for myself. My English ally was worthy of such an alliance. He knew the London and West Coast line thoroughly, and he had the command of a band of workers who were trustworthy and intelligent. The idea was his, and my own judgment was only required in the details. We brought over several officials. Amongst them, the most important was James Macpherson, whom we had ascertained to be the guard most likely to be employed upon the special train. Smith, the stoker, was also in our employ. John Slater, the engine driver, had been approached, but he had been found too obstinate and dangerous, so we desisted. We had no certainty that Monsieur Caratal would take a special, but we thought it very probable, for it was the utmost importance to him that he should reach Paris without delay. It was for this contingency, therefore, that we made special preparations which were complete down to the last long detail before the steamer had sighted the shores of England. You were amused to learn that there was one of my agents on the pilot boat which brought the steamer into its moorings. The moment that Caratal arrived in Liverpool, we knew that he suspected danger and was on his guard. He had brought with him an escort, a dangerous fellow named Gomez, a man who carried weapons and was prepared to use them. This fellow carried Caratal's confidential papers for him and was ready to protect either them or his master. The probability was that Caratal had taken him into his counsels, and that to remove Caratal without removing Gomez would be a mere waste of energy. It was necessary that they should be involved in a common fate, and our plans to that end were much facilitated by request for the special train. On the special train, you understand that 2 of the 3 servants of the company were really an our employee, at a price which would make them independent for a lifetime. I do not go so far as to say that the English are more honest or any other nation, but I have found them more expensive to buy. I have already spoken of my English agent, who is a man with a considerable future before him, unless some complaint of the throat carries him off before his time. I had charge of all arrangements at Liverpool, whilst I was stationed at Kenyon, where I waited a cipher signal to act. When the special was arranged for, my agent instantly telegraphed me and warned me how soon I should have everything ready. He himself, under the name of Horace-Moore, applied immediately for a special also, and in hope that he would be sent down with Monsieur Caratal, which might be, under a certain circumstance, have been helpful to us. If, for example, a great coup had failed, it would be the outcome for the duty of my agent to have shot them both and destroyed the papers. Caratal was on his guard, however, and refused to admit any other traveler. My agent then left the station, returned by another entrance, and entered the guard's van on the side farthest from the platform, and traveled down with Macpherson, the guard. In the meantime, you will be interested to know that my own movements were Everything had been prepared for days before, and the only finishing touches were needed. The sideline which we had chosen was once joined with the main line, but it had been disconnected. We only had to replace a few rails to connect it once more. These rails had been laid down as far as could be done without danger of attracting attention, and now it was merely a case of completing a juncture in the line and arranging the points as they had been for drill. The sleepers had never been removed, and the rails, fish plates, and rivets were all ready for and had been taken from the siding of the abandoned portion of the rail. With my small but competent band of workers, we had everything long ready before the special arrived. When it arrived, it ran off on the special line so easily that the jolting of the points appeared to have been entirely unnoticed by the two travelers. Our plan had been that Smith the stoker should chloroform John Slater the driver, and so that he would vanish with the others. In this respect, in his own respect, our plans miscarried. Except the criminal folly of Macpherson writing home to his wife. Our stoker did his business so clumsily that Slater in his struggles fell off the engine, and through fortune was with us so far as he broke his neck in the fall, still he remained as a blot on that which would otherwise have been one of those complete masterpieces, which are only to be contemplated in silent admiration. The criminal expert will find in John Slater the one flaw in our admirable combinations. A man who has been as many triumphs as I could afford to be frank, and I therefore lay my finger upon John Slater, and I proclaim him to be the flaw. But now I've got our special train on our little 2-line kilometer, and rather more than 1 mile in length, which leads, or rather used to lead, to the abandoned Hertzens mine, once one of the largest coal mines in England. You will ask how it is that no one saw the train upon this unused line. I will answer that it along the entire length runs through a deep cutting, and that unless someone had been on the edge of that cutting, he would not have been seen. There was someone on the edge of that cutting. I was there, and now I will tell you what I saw. My assistant had remained in the points in order that he might superintend the switching off of the train. He had 4 armed men with him, so that if the train ran off the line, we thought it probable, because the points were very rusty, he might have resources to fall back upon. Having once seen it land safely on the sideline, he handed over me the responsibility. I was waiting at the point over which looks the mouth of the mine, and I was also armed, as were my 2 companions. Come what might, you see, I was always ready. The moment the train was fairly on the sideline, Smith, the stoker, slowed down the engine, and then, having turned it on to the full speed again, he and Macpherson, with my English lieutenant, sprang off before it was too late, and it may be that the slowing down was the first attention of the travelers. But the train was running at full speed again before their heads appeared at the open window. It makes me smile to think how bewildered they must have been. Picture to yourself your own feelings. If, looking out of your luxurious carriage, you suddenly perceive that the lines upon which you ran were rusted and corroded, red and yellow with disuse and decay. What a catch must have been in their breath when the second it flashed before them that it was not Manchester, but death which was waiting them at the end of this sinister line. But the train was running at a frantic speed, rolling and rocking over the rotten line, while the wheels made a frightful screaming sound upon the rusted surface. I was close to them and could see their faces. Gareth was praying, I think. There was something like a rosary dangling out of his hand. The other roared like a bull who smells the blood of the slaughterhouse. He saw us standing on the bank, and he beckoned to us like a madman. Then he tore at his wrist and threw the dispatch box out the window at our direction. Of course, the meaning was obvious. Here was the evidence, and they would promise to be silent if their lives were spared. It would have been very agreeable if we had done so, but business is business. Besides, the train was now much beyond our control as theirs. He ceased howling when the train rattled back around the curve, and they saw the black mouth of the mine yawning before them. We had removed the boards which had covered it, and we had cleared the square entrance. The rails had formerly run very close to the shaft for the convenience of loading the coal, and we had only to add 2 or 3 links of rail in order to lead to the very brink of the shaft. In fact, as to the links would not quite fit, our line projected about 3 feet over the edge. We saw the 2 heads at the window, Garrett down below, Gomez above, and they both had been struck silent by what they saw. And yet they could not withdraw their heads. They seemed to be paralyzed them. I had wondered how the train running at a great speed would take the pit into which I had guided it, and I was much interested in finding out. One of my colleagues thought that it would actually jump it, and indeed, it was not very far from doing so. Fortunately, however, it fell short, and the buffers of the engine struck the other lip of the shaft with a tremendous crash. The funnel flew off into the air. The tender carriages and Van Ross smashed into one jumble which, with the remains of the engine, choked for a moment or so the mouth of the pit. And then something gave way in the middle, and something gave way, and the whole mass of green iron, smoking coals and brass fittings, wheels, woodwork, and cushions all crumbled together and crashed down into the mine. We heard the rattle, 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 and as if the breeze struck against the walls, and then quite a long time afterwards there came a deep roar as the remains of the train struck the bottom. The boiler may have burst, and a sharp crash came after the roar, and then a dense cloud of steam and smoke swirled up from the black depths, falling in the spray as thick as the rain all around us. And then the vapor shrouded off into thin wisps which floated away in the summer sunshine, and all was quiet again in the heart seemed mine. And now, having carried out our plans so successfully, it only remained to leave no trace behind us. Our little band of workers at the other end of the rail had already ripped up the rails and disconnected the sideline, replacing everything as it had been before. We were equally busy at the mine. The funnel and other fragments were thrown in, the shaft was planked over as it used to be, and the lines which had led to it were torn up and taken away. And then, without flurry, without delay, we made our way out of the country, most of us to Paris, my English colleague to Manchester, and Macpherson to Southampton, when she immigrated to America. Let the English papers of that state tell you how thoroughly we had done our job, and how completely we had thrown the cleverest of the detectives off of our trail. You will remember that Gomez threw his bag of papers out the window, and I need not say that I secured the bag and brought it to my employers. It may interest my employers now, however, to learn that out of the bag I took 1 or 2 of these papers as a souvenir of the occasion. I have no wish to publish these papers, but still it is every man for himself in this world, and what else can I do if my friends will not come to my aid when I want them, eh? Monsieurs, you may believe that Herbert de Lerac is quite as formidable as he is against you, as when he is with you, and that he is not the man to go up in the guillotine until he has seen that every one of you is en route for New Caledonia. For your own sake, if not for mine, make haste, Monsieur de General Baron. You can fill these blanks for yourself as you read this. I promise you that in the next edition there will be no blanks to fill. P.S. As I look over my statement, there is only one omission which I can see. It concerns the unfortunate man in Macpherson who was foolish enough to write to his wife and to make an appointment with her to New York. It can be imagined that When interests like ours are at stake, we could not leave them to the chance of whether a man in that class of life would not give away his secrets to a woman. Having once broken his oath by writing to his wife, we could not trust him anymore, and we took steps, therefore, to ensure that he should not see his wife. I have sometimes thought that it would be a kindness to write her and assure her that there is no impediments to her marrying again. Okay, that was interesting. Thank you for the hydrates. I hydrated a lot during that story. Oh, cool. I actually got a bot. If anyone ever sees the bot show up in my chat, feel free to go ahead and report them. I don't know how many people are reporting other people's chats. Anyway. But anyway. The music's loud. Thank you, everyone, for coming in. Again, thank you, Oni, for the bits. And for everyone playing the sound alerts. I'm kind of surprised they worked. Especially the sound alerts. I'm glad that the howl actually worked. It didn't happen very often. Let's see who might be on. See, anyone else doing reading fun right now? Only one other person. And they're reading Yankees combination of stories. I don't know if they're reading the first Harry Potter book or they're reading the second book of Richard. I guess they read from 2 books. I don't know. Anyway. If anyone has a... Oh, can't forget to Selfred. Hey, Fred. How you doing? I did see you pop in during the last story. Let's see. Do we go for another reader? See if Falcor's on. What's she reading? Fruit of the Gods. He's also doing ASMR stuff. Does anyone have a suggestion? Well, that's my cat. It's really funny because I could hear it twice. um, I should see who these people doing ASMR are doing. What about Papa Penguin? Again, thank you everyone for coming in.
Say your prayers,
tomorrow night,
little one. Don't forget my son.
And someone else's stream.
Include everyone. Tuck you in, warm within, keep you free from sin.
Be over
till the Sandman
stream.
comes.
Why the hell is it
one eye open, gripping
turn this in? But yeah, we're gonna be over in Waste tomorrow. It's starting at it'll be 7 Central, so 2 hours earlier than I usually stream. And we'll be doing a monster dating game apparently, so that'll be fun. So yeah, let's go raid Papa Penguin, and we'll put those raid messages up. Forward message. Subscriber message. Choose whichever may be appropriate for you. The subscriber message, you can actually unlock the emote if you want to do it that way. But yeah, I will also be playing with Papa Penguin Saturday evening in a fairy tale role-playing game. So yeah, that'll be fun. So, I hope everyone has a great night, get some rest, or if you're not resting, you know, have a good time zone. And I will see you all next time.